والمحصنات من النساء إلا ما ملكت أيمانكم كتاب الله عليكم وأحل لكم ما وراء ذلكم أن تبتغوا بأموالكم محصنين غير مسافحين فما استمتعتم به منهن فآتوهن أجورهن فريضة ولا جناح عليكم فيما تراضيتم به من بعد الفريضة إن الله كان عليما حكيما.
And also forbidden to you are all married women, muhsanat, except those women whom your right hand have come to possess as a result of war. This is Allah's decree, and it is binding upon you. But it is lawful for you to seek out all women except these, offering them your wealth and the protection of wedlock, rather than using them for the unfettered satisfaction of lust. And in exchange of what you enjoy by marrying them, pay their bridal due as an obligation. But there's no blame on you if you mutually agree to alter the settlement after it has been made. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. Also forbidden to you are all married women, muhsanat, except those women whom your right hands have come to possess as a result of war. Women who come as captives of war, leaving their husbands behind in Dar al-Harb, domain of war, are not prohibited, for their marriage is nullified by virtue of their entry into Dar al-Islam, domain of Islam. A man may marry such women, and if they happen to be his slave girls, he may have sexual relations with them. There is disagreement, however, among jurists as to what should be done if both husband and wife have been taken captive together. Abu Hanifa and the jurists of his school are of the opinion that their marriage should remain intact. Malik and Shafi, on the other hand, argue that their matrimonial contract should be rendered void. Many misunderstandings seem to persist about the right to have sexual relations with one's slave girls. It is pertinent to call attention to the following regulations of Islam. 1. Islam does not permit soldiers of the Islamic army to have sexual relations with women they capture in war. Islamic law requires that such women should first be handed over to the government, which then has the right to decide what should be done with them. It may either set them free unconditionally, release them on payment of ransom, exchange them for Muslim prisoners of war held by the enemy, or distribute them among the soldiers. A soldier may have sexual relations only with that woman who has been entrusted to him by the government. 2. Even then, he may not have sexual relations with her until at least one menstrual period has expired. This is in order to establish that she is not already pregnant. If the woman concerned is pregnant, one may not have sexual relations with her until after the birth of her child. 3. It is not necessary for female captives of war to be people of the book, in order that sexual relations with them be permitted. The man to whom such a woman is entrusted has the right to have sexual relations with her regardless of her religious affiliations. 4. Only that person to whom a female captive has been entrusted has the right to have sexual relations with her. Any child born to her will be regarded as the legitimate child of her master, and will be entitled to all the rights laid down by the law for one's issue. Moreover, once such a woman has given birth to a child, she may not be sold to anyone, and on the death of her master, she automatically becomes a free person. 5. If the master allows the woman to marry someone else, he ceases to have the right to sexual relations with her, but retains the right to have her serve him in other ways. 6. Although the law has fixed the maximum number of wives at 4, it has set no limit with regard to slave girls. The law does not lay down a limit in order to encourage people to accumulate huge armies of slave girls and thereby turn their homes into dens of sexual enjoyment. Rather, the law does not define the limit because the effects of war and the total number of female captives that would have been to be disposed of after a certain war are unpredictable. 7. In the same way as other rights of property are transferable, so are the proprietary rights regarding the captives of war that have been legally entrusted to a man by the state. 8. Since the regular conferment of property rights is as legal an act as that of marriage, there is no basis for a person who feels no revulsion towards the idea of marriage to feel revulsion towards the idea of having sexual relations with a slave girl duly entrusted to him. 9. If a government confers proprietary rights to a man over a female captive of war, it forfeits the right to withdraw those rights in the same way as the guardian, wali, of a woman ceases to have the right to withdraw his agreement to the marriage proposal after the marriage has been contracted. 10. If a military commander permitted his soldiers to temporarily use the female captives as objects of sexual desire and distributed them among the soldiers for that purpose, such an act would be considered unlawful by Islamic law. Such an act is not essentially different from fornication or adultery.
ومن لم يستطع منكم طولا أن ينكح المحصنات المؤمنات فمما ملكت أيمانكم من فتياتكم المؤمنات والله أعلم بإيمانكم بعضكم من بعض فانكحوهن بإذن أهلهن وآتوهن أجورهن بالمعروف محصنات غير مسافحات ولا متخذات أخدان فإذا أحصن فإن أتين بفاحشة فعليهن نصف ما على المحصنات من العذاب ذلك لمن خشي العنة منكم وأن تصبروا خير لكم والله غفور رحيم.
And those of you who cannot afford to marry free believing women, muhsanat, then marry such believing women whom your right hand possesses. Allah knows all about your faith. All of you belong to one another. Marry them then with the leave of their guardians, and give them their bridal due in a fair manner, that they may live in the protection of wedlock, rather than be either mere objects of unfettered lust, or given to secret love affairs. Then if they become guilty of immoral conduct after they have entered into wedlock, they shall be liable to half the penalty to which free women, muhsanat, are liable. This relaxation is for those of you who fear to fall into sin by remaining unmarried. But if you persevere, it is better for you. Allah is all forgiving, all compassionate. Allah knows all about your faith. All of you belong to one another. The difference between the status of people is relative. All Muslims are alike. If there is any true distinction, its basis is a person's faith, and faith is not an exclusive privilege of the rich or so-called upper classes of the society. So it is possible for a slave girl to be superior in respect of her faith and morals to a woman belonging to the elite of a society. They shall be liable to half the penalty to which free women, muhsanat, are liable. A superficial reading of this verse can lead to the mistaken conclusion, as Khawarij and others have done, that stoning is not the prescribed punishment for adultery. Such people ask, if stoning is the prescribed punishment for extramarital sexual intercourse, then how is it possible to have that punishment with regard to slave girls? Such people have not noted carefully the wording of this verse. In this section, see verses 24 to 5, the term muhsanat, protected women, is used in two different meanings. First, it is used in the sense of married women, that is, those who enjoy the protection of their husbands. Second, it is used in the sense of women belonging to families. For instance, those who enjoy the protection of families even though they may not be married. In the verse under discussion, the word muhsanat is used in the latter sense. For instance, in the sense of women who enjoy the protection of families as opposed to slave girls. At the same time, the word is also used in the first meaning, when slave girls have acquired the protection accorded by the contract of marriage, فَإِذَا أُسِنَا. They will be liable to the punishment laid down in this verse if they have unlawful sexual intercourse. It is therefore apparent that a free woman enjoys two kinds of protection. One is the protection of her family, through which she remains protected even when she is not married. The second is the protection of her husband, which reinforces the protection of the family that she already enjoys. As long as a slave girl remains a slave, she does not enjoy the protection of the family. However, when she is married, she has the protection of her husband and of her husband alone. This protection is partial. Even after marriage, she is neither liberated from the bond of her master, nor does she attain the status enjoyed by free women. The punishment prescribed for a married slave girl is accordingly half the punishment of an unmarried free woman rather than half of that of a married free woman. This also explains that the punishment for unlawful sexual intercourse, zina, laid down in Surah Al-Nur 24:2, refers to the offense committed by unmarried free women alone, and it is in comparison with their punishment that the punishment of married slave women has been laid down as half. As for free married women, they deserve more severe punishment than the unmarried free women, muhsanat, for they violate the double protection. Even though the Quran does not specifically mention punishment by stoning, it does allude to it in a subtle manner. This relaxation is for those of you who fear falling into sin by remaining unmarried. That is, if a man cannot afford to marry a free woman, then he should marry a slave girl with the permission of her master.
يريد الله ليبين لكم ويهديكم سنن الذين من قبلكم ويتوب عليكم والله عليم حكيم.
Allah wants to make all this clear to you and to guide you to the ways which the righteous have followed in the past. He will turn graciously towards you. Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. Here a general reference is made to the directives embodied in this surah, as well as those revealed earlier in Surah Al-Baqarah, which deal with social and collective matters. It is stressed that these directives revealed those lasting principles observed by the prophets and their followers from the earliest times. It is merely out of His grace and benevolence that God liberated them from their state of ignorance, jahiliyah, and opened them to the way of life of the righteous.
والله يريد أن يتوب عليكم ويريد الذين يتبعون الشهوات أن تميلوا ميلا عظيما.
And Allah indeed wants to turn graciously towards you, but those who follow their lusts would want you to drift far away from the right way. This refers to the hypocrites, the ultra-conservatives, and the Jews who lived on the outskirts of Medina. Both the hypocrites and the conservatives were incensed at the reforms introduced by Islam, as these were diametrically opposed to the age-old customs and traditions of their society and culture. These reforms were numerous. A share of the inheritance was assigned to daughters. Widows were liberated from bondage to the will of their husbands' families, and were granted the freedom to marry whomever they wished after the expiry of the waiting period, iddah. Marriage with one stepmother and with two sisters together was prohibited. Adopted sons were disinherited, and a foster father's marriage with either the divorced or widowed wife of his adopted son was declared lawful. These and other such reforms were so totally opposed to the customary laws of the Arabs that it was impossible for the elders and the blind devotees of the ways of their forefathers not to protest against them vehemently. They long continued to grumble against these injunctions. Mischievous people pointed to these innovations and exploited them by provoking people against the Prophet, peace be upon him's movement of reform. For instance, they would meet those born as a result of the marriage which had been prohibited by Islam and try to infuriate them by saying that according to the newfangled teachings of Muhammad, peace be upon him, the relationship between their parents was unlawful. The Jews, on the other hand, had woven a complex network of laws and regulations for themselves. The result was that they had forbidden a great number of things which were, in fact, lawful. Additionally, they had introduced a number of superstitions into God's law. It was argued that the simple and straightforward law of the Quran was out of tune with the tastes and temperaments of both the religious leaders and the ordinary people. The Quranic injunctions simply infuriated them, and as soon as they came to know of any Quranic law, they vehemently denounced it. They expected the Quran to endorse and validate all the legal deductions and all the superstitions and myths of their forefathers, and to treat them as an integral part of the law of God. If the Quran would not do so, then they would refrain from recognizing it as the Book of God. Let us take the following as an example. According to Jewish usage, a woman was considered completely unclean during her menstrual period. Hence, they neither ate the food she cooked, drank from the cup of water she offered, nor even sat with her. It was even considered unwholesome to be touched by her. Thus, for a few days every month, a woman virtually became an untouchable in her own house. Owing to the influence of the Jews, the same custom had found its way into the Arab families of Medina. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, arrived in Medina, he was asked about this matter. In response to this query, verse 222 of Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed. In the light of the principle embodied in the verse, the Prophet, peace be upon him, made it clear that it was unlawful to have sexual intercourse with a woman during her menstrual period, but it was only that relationship and no other that was unlawful. This caused uproar among the Jews. They claimed that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was bent upon reversing their legal injunctions to the extent that he wanted to legalize whatever they held as prohibited and prohibit whatever they held as lawful.
يريد الله أن يخفف عنكم وخلق الإنسان ضعيفا.
Allah wants to lighten your burdens, for man was created weak.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما.
Believers, do not devour one another's possessions wrongfully. Rather than that, let there be trading by mutual consent. You shall not kill yourselves. Surely Allah is ever compassionate to you. Rather than that, let there be trading by mutual consent. The expression wrongfully embraces all transactions which are opposed to righteousness and which are either legally or morally reprehensible. By contrast, trade signifies the mutual transfer of benefits between the parties concerned, such as that underlying those transactions in which one person provides whatever satisfies the needs of another person and is paid in return. Mutual consent means that the exchange should be free of undue pressure, fraud, and deception. Although bribery and interest apparently represent transactions based on mutual consent, closer examination reveals that such consent takes place by constraint and under pressure. In games of chance, too, the participants seem to consent freely to the outcome. This kind of consent, however, is due to the expectation entertained by the participants that they will win. No one takes part anticipating loss. Fraudulent transactions also seem to be based on the mutual consent of the parties concerned. That kind of consent, however, is based on the false assumption that no fraud is involved in the transaction. Nobody who knew that he would be subjected to fraud would consent to be a party to that transaction. You shall not kill yourselves. This can be considered either as complementary to the preceding sentence or as an independent statement. If it is complementary, it means that to consume the property of others by wrongful means is tantamount to courting one's own destruction. For such practices corrupt society on such a scale that even the most cunning are not spared their destructive consequences. This is in addition to the severe punishment that is bound to be meted out to such people in the next life. Taken as an independent statement, it can mean either that one should not kill others or that one should not kill oneself. Both the words used and the sequence in which they have been placed by God in this verse make each of these three meanings feasible. Surely Allah is ever compassionate to you. God wishes His creatures well. Their well-being and salvation please Him, and it is out of benevolence that He has forbidden things harmful to human beings.
وَمَن يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ عُدْوَانًا وَظُلْمًا فَسَوْفَ نُصْلِيهِ نَارًا وَكَانَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ يَسِيرًا.
And whoever does this by way of transgression and injustice, him shall we surely cast into the fire. That indeed is quite easy for Allah.
إِن تَجْتَنِبُوا كَبَائِرَ مَا تُنْهَوْنَ عَنْهُ نُكَفِّرْ عَنْكُمْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ وَنُدْخِلْكُمْ مُدْخَلًا كَرِيمًا.
But if you avoid the major sins which you have been forbidden, we shall remit your trivial offenses and cause you to enter an honorable abode. We shall remit your trivial offenses. God is not overly exacting and severe in His judgments. He is not on the lookout for trivial omissions and lapses on the part of His creatures in order to punish them. God is prepared to condone minor omissions and may even spare a man from being presented with a charge sheet provided his record is free of major sins. But if a man's record is full of major transgressions, he will be required to explain all the sins he has committed, both major and minor. We need at this stage to grasp the essential differences between major and minor sins. After reflecting on this question in the light of the Quran and Sunnah, it seems to me, and God alone knows what is absolutely correct, that three elements turn an act into a major sin. 1. Violation of rights, be it either the rights of God, of parents, of other human beings, or even of one's own self. The greater a person's rights, the greater is the sin in violating them. Hence, sin is characterized in the Quran as wrongdoing, zulm. It is for the same reason that associating others with God and His divinity is called the great wrong in the Quran. 2. Insufficient fear of God and arrogance and indifference towards Him, as a result of which man does not heed God's commandments, even willfully violates them, and deliberately desists from carrying them out. The greater the brazenness, temerity, and fearlessness with which one disobeys God, the more heinous is the sin in His eyes. It is for this reason that sin is also termed masiyah, disobedience, and fisk. 3. Sin is aggravated by breaking those bonds and relationships on which the peace and tranquility of social order rest. These bonds include the relationship between a man and his Lord, as well as that between a man and his fellow beings. The more important a bond is, the greater is the harm done to the peace of human society when that bond is broken. Likewise, the stronger the expectation that the sanctity of a certain bond will be honored, the greater is the sin incurred through its desecration. Let us take the case of unlawful sexual intercourse in its various degrees. This act is inimical to the existence of a sound social order and is therefore a major sin. But in certain cases the sin becomes even graver. For instance, it is more serious if committed by a married person than by one who is unmarried. Similarly, unlawful sexual intercourse with a married woman is graver than with an unmarried woman. Again, to commit this act with one's neighbors is more heinous than with others. And to commit this act with women within the prohibited degrees, such as one's sister, daughter, or mother, is far more abominable than with others. Further still, it is much graver sin to commit such an act in places of worship than elsewhere. The difference in the degree of such sinfulness is based on the considerations we have mentioned above. Wherever the sanctity of a relationship is normally respected, wherever there is a bond which deserves to be held sacred, and wherever the disruption of a particular relationship is likely to result in greater harm and corruption, the gravity of the sin increases. This is why in certain places the Quran uses the term fujur to denote sin.